to some extent, the notion of the big law business model is probably a misnomer. I think the business model originated in big law firms, but it's not confined to them. So I'm not necessarily talking about size. I'm also, in the time available, inevitably going to generalize. So forgive me if I oversimplify and draw maybe some apparently unsupported conclusions. We can explore those later. But I have to say, I've worried about the sustainability of the big law business model or the law firm business model for a number of years. And what really brought it into sharp relief was a comment last week in the Times, which I'll just read to you. So, I'm a junior lawyer in London. I get paid around £135,000 a year. They don't pay as well because the job is good. They pay as well because the job is awful. I still wish I'd listened to the many voices telling me not to do it. The job is extremely stressful and all-consuming and involves dealing with unpleasant people on a daily basis. If you're a bright young graduate considering this path, find something else to do. Unless you have vaguely sociopathic tendencies, in which case you may thrive. And that really got me thinking about the nature of big law practice in particular, but the business model that underpins it. So is that model sustainable? Let me take in turn each of what I think the four elements of a business model are. Their value, resources, returns, and financing. Those four elements will apply to any business. I'm going to apply them to law firms and big law in particular. So let me start with the first one, creating value for clients. I think it's the most important and it's the least well understood element of the business model. The big law model essentially says value is cost plus based on time. In other words, it's an internal, outward-looking model. But I don't see how creating value can be found in time-based billing. Value is based on outcomes to the client, not the time input of the lawyer. And outcomes in this context for me are things like the terms of the deal that you're able to get for the client, the price or the settlement that you can agree, maybe even the relationships that you can retain or repair on behalf of a client. So it's not about added value, shouldn't be confused. Added value is things like client entertaining, legal updates, secondments even. They're for me around the periphery. They don't go to the core of what we should be doing as law firms. And I'd also say you can't constantly move up the value chain in response to competition, whether that's from niche firms, from in-house legal departments, from alternative legal services providers. All that would do is just push more firms further up the value chain, chasing less work. So for me, I think creating value has to involve innovation. It has to involve integrating different types of inputs. And unfortunately, they are things that are typically discouraged in law firms. And finally, I'd say on this that innovation, and for that matter, competitive advantage, don't come from asking who else has done this. The second element of the business model then is resourcing to deliver that value. And the big law business model is essentially human resource, and it's predominantly lawyer human resource. We all know that employment costs are the biggest component by far of a professional service firm's cost base. And yet here we are employing more professional people, paying them more year on year. We've seen the salary rises recently announced. So we're turning what should be a variable cost essentially into a quasi-fixed cost. Is that a good basis for a business model? So I think we need to start working on reconfiguring and combining different elements, mainly of intangible capital. So yes, the human, but social capital, technological capital, organizational capital. Look at what technology and process in particular can do to deliver value and efficiency. And we also need to rethink the balance of internal and external resources, because less than we think needs to be done internally by lawyers. Third element then is allocating the returns that you get from using those resources to deliver value. And here we start with the notion of net profit in a law firm. And I think what too few firms figure out is that actually net profit is a return to three different things: to partners' labor, to capital employed, and to risk undertaken in the business. In the big law business model, that's all rolled into a single return measured as profit per equity partner. It's a short-term, income-based, fully extracted, probably tax inefficient approach to returns. It's rife with perverse incentives as well, relating to personal productivity, that horrible notion of client ownership, internal competition, underinvestment. And when making profit becomes harder, the focus switches to managing the denominator. In other words, firms manage down the number of equity partners so that profit per equity partner can still go up even if revenue or profits are flat or even declining. And then the fourth element, financing the business to deliver that value, resourcing appropriately and generating a sustainable return. The big law business model on this is internal equity and external debt. And even for the most part, the internal equity is often financed by external debt. Not surprisingly, that approach of profit extraction often leaves firms struggling with capital needs for cash flow, to meet their debt repayments, to invest in growth and innovation, even to repay capital for former or retired departed partners, which then puts even more over-reliance on short-term debt through overdrafts. The full range of financing options would consider debt and equity, internal and external, private and public, short-term and long-term. There's a way to go on financing. So, what's my conclusion? A business model only works if each element is aligned with the others, and all are aligned to a longer-term strategy and the market. Too often what we see in law firms are fragile coalitions driven by short-term, individualized incentives where hardly any of the elements of a business model have been thought through, let alone truly aligned. So no, on the face of it, the big law firm business model doesn't seem to be a recipe for sustainability. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln?